I think she can see the screen, hopefully. Yes, you can join on YouTube. And I actually would like prefer if you just check that for me real quick. So I'm gonna go. Yeah, it's a public thing, and because but no, I mean it's not like they care about our lecture. So open link in new tab. Okay. So I'm gonna change close this, and I'm gonna send an email out real quick. Inbox. Okay, compose. Favorite courses 33. Link for today's class. And send to all. If you click on the link, please let me know that the thing is actually working. So I know that I have to share my slides somehow. But if I share the slides, then maybe I think this is good enough. I'll just go here. $33. Is the link working on YouTube? Oh, really? Let me check the outbox. Yeah, send it to. I hope it's not in like people's junk folders or whatever. Michaela, did you get anything? You did? Okay. Oh, I would check the junk or something on there. And is the link working then? It should just be like a YouTube video with like a live icon below it, whatever. Oh, look, I like my video. Bam. Like and subscribe. Yeah, that's fine. But you'll have to turn off because otherwise it'll be like an infinite loop. It'll hear that when you play there, it will hear here, and then it'll just keep playing. So. Wait, so what's going on at the fair? Like, you have anything you're doing there, or?
My horse is there.
Okay, cool.
One of the girls that I grew up showing with, her horse was dispensary attendant.
Are you able to get ivermectin for your horses for like parasites and stuff? The actual medicine that they need?
I work at PBS,
Okay.
which is animal health.
Uh-huh.
They're a very big company AGRI.
Uh-huh.
The store has probably 4 different ones that
Okay.
are not
Cool.
flavored, like
Yeah.
4 individual like
Uh-huh.
tubes of dewormer for
Uh-huh.
horses.
Right.
There's probably 4 of those, but we're out of stock on the website. Like we're out of stock in the warehouse.
What?
And of that one, the apple flavor ivermectin, and then there's a couple different brands that are out of stock.
Some of the stuff is actually blown out of proportion. Ivermectin is not toxic to humans or anything. It's just that I don't think there's actual reason why people should be taking it. But,
It's not the right dosage, is what.
right. But my thing is, I felt bad for the horses. I was like, what did they do? They were just like hanging out, trying to get those parasites out. And here we are. So, but you are able to procure medicine for your horses in case they need it.
I think we don't run out in the store.
Okay. But like,
They don't do something else besides ivermectin to get.
right, but like they don't regularly eat those medicines, right? I mean, unless there's a need to.
Sometimes you don't even have to, depending on how well you manage your fields. Like a friend of mine, they go out and they pick out, they don't just leave the poop in the field.
Right.
They go in through with their spreader and.
Oh, so that's what causes that cycle. The horse may accidentally eat its own poo.
Or just ground around.
Right.
Yeah. So they get fecals done, and if you're, like, the shed count is low, then they don't worry about it.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of vets will do that before they use a dewormer, because then you don't get the parasite resistance.
Well, I don't think we have any actual. Open image. Okay. Well, one person watching. Is Brooke actually going to join us? Anyway, now that the stream has started, I might as well stream it. So, all right, folks. I think it is 2:30, so we can go ahead and get started with Perishable good pricing and the Cobweb model. Eventually, I think today's lecture, it's good, I guess, that we are streaming it, because you can always take a look at it later when you're working on the homework problems. What's going to happen is that I'm going to do this lecture today, and then we will literally do the exact same thing in Wednesday's class as well, because there's going to be a break on Monday, and I know people will forget, and then you will be required to do homework, which will be very similar to a possible exam question, for instance, okay? So very important stuff about how people in the market, so producers and consumers, behave, and why it is so important to, I mean, this is what we're going to be talking about, is why somebody like Justin Scott, who is not in class, but I'm sure people know of. People know Justin, right? You know Justin. He was in the fall 2020 class with us. He's a farmer. Somebody like him will inadvertently behave, and this model essentially explains that. The idea of how prices drive people to dedicate more acreage to their commodity, stuff along those lines. We'll get to that in just a second. Okay, domestic demands are fairly steady. So this is, I teach an Ag 20,000 class, which most of you have taken, and Amanda is currently in, where we were basically talking about this. By the way, sorry, the slide situation is okay, right?
Yeah, I just didn't look on camera. I forgot that. Yeah.
Oh, you were on
That was
Blackboard?
my bad,
That's okay,
yeah.
that's okay.
I didn't even know the back said on them.
That's okay. So they're in Canvas, and all the homework and stuff, everything was up there. Anyway, so domestic demands are fairly steady, and by that I mean is that people are still people, and there's only so much food you can realistically eat in a given season. Okay, of course, the steadiness also comes from the fact that even people outside the country who are buying our food, they are still people, and they're also going to be consuming a steady amount of diet. Unless there are other shocks which can happen, which of course did happen in April, May 2020. We have already talked about this at this point, but just to summarize what happened last year. Some increase, of course, for seasonal products. So I'm sure people are familiar with turkeys and cranberries. I, of course, wear cranberries because my favorite thing in a Thanksgiving dinner are cranberries. That's the red stuff, right? That people have? Okay. I mean, I get invited to a lot of Thanksgiving dinners, and I'm always like, yeah, the red stuff is the good stuff, okay? I, of course, put chicken in here because chicken is my favorite type of protein, and whenever I'm in the summer, I'm barbecuing with people, so chicken would be an example, okay? Foreign demand can be more variable, and it is less predictable depending on what's going on in the world. I mean, if there's some sort of war going on, then if that country buys our products, they're probably going to buy less of it because of some sort of geopolitical instability. So that's essentially the idea of demand shifts. People trying to buy food, but season changes and stuff. It amazes me. This is anecdotal experience. I cannot comment on it based on data. But you know how you go to a place like Walmart, or who actually shops in Walmart? I mean, okay, people can shop, but where do people go for their food stuff? I go to like Bueller's and Walmart in conjunction. What do you have up in the wherever you live?
Giant Eagle.
Okay, yeah, Giant Eagle, sure. Okay. I have noticed specifically for Thanksgiving that they somehow always seem to have excess, never less. So I think they just pre-plan that demand is going to be that high. And then there's like a clearance sale on turkeys in like mid-Jan for some reason. And I'm like, come on, you can learn, right? I mean, try to project demand better. Unless the population dramatically increases, you should anticipate a certain amount of turkeys selling. Anyway, it seems like a waste of food to me. Okay, let's talk about this idea of market clearing. Something that you already know, by the way, at this point. The process of the market price adjusting so that all buyers and sellers currently wishing to trade at the price can do so. I literally gave you an example just now when we were talking about turkeys and them having excess of them after the end of Thanksgiving and Christmas. You see how they have clearance sales? That's because they are trying to figure out a price, a low price, that somebody's just going to buy it from. Like they'll be like, okay, let's sell the turkey for half the price, and maybe some consumer is going to buy it. Okay. Here's where it gets a little interesting, though. The more perishable the commodity, so meat generally is pretty perishable unless you freeze it, the less able sellers are to wait for a better price. Okay. So this is a very important consideration. Not like in the kind of discussion we're having about retail to consumer discussion, but from the perspective of producers selling it to large processors and those guys selling it to retailers and et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So the gray box is important. The more perishable the commodity, the less able sellers are to wait for a better price. Okay. So this is the first slide, which is going to be super important. I will again draw your attention. Let me log in real quick because I think I already was there and I should show this to you. No, did I? Canvas. Courses. Close this. Courses. Okay, so this is the slide that we are currently looking at. Below these two indented are reading material, and you have to read this material. okay? There's going to be homework problems from this, but everything that I'm going to be saying, I have articulated that to the best of my ability in the simplest language possible in that perishable crops reading material PDF, because I'm going to provide you with the intuition, which people will sort of, I guess, forget in a bit, but then you have to stare at it a bit more, and then you will just get it much better. Okay? Let's do, of course, a quick review of this idea of how those demand and supply functions work. So if I have some sort of price and quantity, and I have a demand function, and I have a supply function, okay? So the red chart over there is conveying demand is downward sloping. If a price or something is lower, people tend to demand more, okay? So if you are here at some price, let's say 10, if the price of that same product is lower, let's say it's 3, then if people wanted 1 before, now they want 6 of them, hypothetically. Price drops, people want more. That's how demand is explained, okay? All of this stuff you already know, but just to bring this back up. Why does the supply curve slope upward? Anyone? Madeline knows. Why does the supply curve go like this? You're almost there. Michaela knows. Cosette knows. She was superintendent in fall 2020 Act 20,000 class. Why does the supply curve slope upward? So the demand stuff is much more intuitive, right? I mean, stuff is cheaper, so you want more of it. So that's sort of the downward sloping demand. I'm telling you that the supply, so the person who's making, let's say, apples or strawberries.
There's less of it, so they have the price goes up.
So the way you want to think about this, you want to think about it in terms of costs, okay? Let's say you have to make one t-shirt. Okay? You're good at making t-shirts. You make a single t-shirt, and you spend a certain amount of thread, money, you spend some time on it, and you're like, cool, I'm going to charge $15 for this t-shirt. Okay, let's say it's a very middle of the road t-shirt. $15 for a t-shirt. Fair. The price essentially reflects the amount of time you spend making it and the materials that you require. Now, what I'm telling you is that I want your shirt sells, somebody really likes it, now you're like, cool, I'm going to scale up my operation. I'm going to scale this bad boy up from 1 t-shirt to 1,000 t-shirts. What's going to happen to your costs? So instead of making 1 t-shirt, you want to make 1,000 shirts. What's going to happen to your costs? Obvious answer. Amanda knows. We're making 1 shirt. You spend some supplies and material on it, which costs you some money. Are you going to make 1,000 of those shirts? What's going to happen to your cost for those supplies and materials? This is going to go up, right? So essentially, because you're going to have some external things, like for 1,000 shirts, you're probably going to have to rent a whole new building. So those things at the margin for that 1 shirt, it should just start going up. Because if you rented out a building, it doesn't matter whether you make 1,000 shirts or 1 shirt. If you just make a 1 shirt, you're still going to have to pay the rent for the building. So on average, as you decide to supply more in the market, so there's quantity increasing in this direction. If you decide to supply more in the market, the per unit price is basically going to start going up. Okay, and that's basically the idea of demand and supply. Wherever the demand meets with supply, let's say this is price $6, and then this right here is 4. Wherever the demand meets the supply is what we call an economic equilibrium. Okay, and that's sort of like the very basic idea. Okay, what we want to do is we want to translate that idea into something more complex, and yes, it is kind of complex, is the idea of how does this picture change when you start thinking about time, when time is a very important factor, okay? So before we even actually get to that, I'm going to throw some scenarios at you, which will actually help you visualize that problem a little better. So same idea, price and quantity, but now I'm saying that the demand curve is basically flat, okay? Some price here, and this demand curve is flat. I just showed you it was like this. Now this is like a horizontal line. What does that intuitively tell me? Intuitively, it's just like, it's like a line. Not like downward sloping.
The demand isn't changing.
That is true. So the idea is that for the price, whatever this price is, the demand is perfectly elastic. People for this price could be buying here, let's say Q star, or they could be buying here. Intuitively known as perfectly elastic. In real world, this is akin to saying this. Let me give you a very real world example. Suppose, do people eat chocolates here? Am I the only addict in the classroom? Wow. I have a chocolate addiction issue, like a massive one. I really shouldn't go into it because the moment I even talk about my addiction, I get a craving. So I'm really into chocolates, okay? Every day after gym, at 10:45 at night, I cross over from Planet Fitness to Walmart just to buy a 4-pack Kit Kat, okay?
You earned it, right?
I did, but I really shouldn't be eating that much sugar. Anyway, I love that Kit Kat. What this graph is saying basically is that if the price, I can tell you the exact price, which is $1.48 for that 4-bar Kit Kat. If that price drops even by a cent, so it goes from $1.48 to $1.47, my demand for those Kit Kats should rise infinitely, like infinitely. Now, while I admit cheaper Kit Kats would draw me to buy more Kit Kats, which again would be extremely unhealthy for me, but I don't think I'll buy an infinite number of Kit Kats, okay? Well, with me, you can never say never, okay? But I don't think I'll buy an infinite number of Kit Kats because that's where that demand curve is going, basically, to infinity with that construction, okay? So that's the idea of perfectly elastic. A tiny change in price gives you a massive response in quantities. Again, pay very careful attention to this construction because when you start talking about strawberries here, which is a perishable good, this will become really important, okay? So we talked about this issue of a perfectly elastic demand. You can also have the flip side scenario, which is you have a perfectly inelastic demand. So you, instead of having a horizontal line, you have like a vertical line. What is this conveying? What is this intuitively telling us? Notice how prices fluctuate on this axis, but with this line like this, you have a very consistent and flat quantity. Just that one quantity. Intuitively, what that's saying is that no matter how much price increases or decreases, I am going to buy the same amount. Same amount. So here's the flip scenario of the Kit Kat example I was just giving you. Suppose, who makes Kit Kat? Nestle? Who's the company? Whoever the company of Kit Kat is, decides to go crazy. They go completely crazy and say, I'm going to charge the 4-pack Kit Kat for $100. And because my demand is completely inelastic, I will actually pay for it. You know why? Because I'm an addict, okay? I really hope they don't make it to $100 because then it really will be a dilemma for me. Anyway, that's the idea of an inelastic demand. No matter how much the price moves up or down, the quantity demanded remains the same. Give me one real world example, Kit Kats aside, of where you see this in the world. It is not exactly a food example because food, as we know, we love food.
Gas.
So gas is actually a very good example. So it won't be perfectly like a vertical, but you are correct. Gas does have a very inelastic demand. That is a very good example. Anybody who is just very close to being just a vertical line. So the best example actually comes from the medicine field. Okay, if you look at the demand for insulin, people literally need it to actually survive. Type 1 diabetics. And this is why there's so much political tension around insulin, because the insulin producers somehow always periodically jack the price up, and then people have to buy it. Or, well, if you don't buy it, you're probably going to die. Okay, so that is a real issue. By the way, the insulin price thing is really like an American nightmare, because if you go to other countries, the price of insulin is a lot cheaper, because this is the kind of scenario where if you let the market do its thing, well, the market will exploit it. So you need some sort of intervention to correct for that. Okay, so anyway, vertical demand, inelastic, horizontal demand, elastic. Okay, you can have the exact same idea for something like supply. You can have a perfectly inelastic supply. So Michaela is a producer of hay, for instance, and she's like, I don't care how high the price of hay goes per ton. Like it's $1,000 per ton, and she's like, nope, I'm still gonna make like 100 bales of it. That's it. That's like my flat production. I am not providing more to the market, no matter how high the price goes. Okay, that would be the example of inelastic supply. Elastic supply, a horizontal line, would just be the exact opposite. Price moves up just by a little, like very little, and she's like, okay, here you can have all the hay you want. Okay, an unlikely scenario, but theoretically possible. Okay, so are people okay with this setup, inelastic versus elastic? Very important for Perishable when we just sort of get into that discussion. Okay, if you're okay with it, again, you can review the video later. We'll again probably talk about this in Wednesday's class, but I hope I'm able to motivate that problem to you correctly. Now let's look at what's happening with the strawberry market. Who likes eating strawberries? I'm actually a strawberry person. You can get like a nice box of strawberries, although I do get sometimes concerned because like strawberries tend to leave red marks on like paper towels and stuff, and I'm like, why are there red marks here? Like, are they like dousing this in color or something? Kind of suspicious, but I have noticed that happen. Anyway, those concerns aside, you'll notice that the demand that I have drawn for strawberries is very similar to what I just had. You know, like a normal demand. If prices of strawberries, okay, so 0.5 per pound, they decline, people want more strawberries, and then if the price is higher, people want less strawberries. That makes sense. So from our perspective, the consumer perspective, it makes perfect sense. Very normal. Here's the problem with the supplies, though. Because it is a perishable good, when, by the way, when is strawberries typically harvested? Anyone? Obvious answer. Very similar to tomatoes, or tomatoes, whichever way you pronounce that. Strawberries are harvested typically end of June, early July, depending on how the weather's playing out, but that's when they're harvested. The problem is you really do have a short window. So here's what that graph is basically telling you is happening, okay? This part of the supply curve, so these are just the reverse L's of the supply parts. This part of the supply curve is basically elastic. And what it is saying is that I'm spending money to get my land, I'm spending all kinds of fixed costs that I have, which I will always have. Okay, even if my crop completely bombs, I'm going to have that fixed amount of spending for my costs. But then it takes a completely vertical or inelastic turn because of the way the setup works. There is no upward sloping supply that I just showed you. The reason why it is vertical is because there comes a point where the strawberries simply have to go. They have to be consumed or they have to be thrown away. That's where we stop at point one. So suppose Cosette is a strawberry producer, she allocated a certain amount of land, and she was able to produce 1 billion pounds of strawberries. If she does produce at 1 billion pounds of strawberries, what price does she get? What price does she get in the market? $1.50 is $1.50 is correct. Okay. Here's the problem though, and this is why perishables are such a complicated issue. And I actually don't recommend that you, if you end up becoming a farmer, which some of you already are, try not to go in the perishable market for the problem I'm about to tell you. Suppose she miscalculates. Suppose she's like, look, there's going to be a good year. Prices are looking higher at the outset, not at the time of harvest, but at the outset in like early Jan, prices are looking good. I'm going to go all in. You allocate more land and you produce 2 billion pounds of strawberries. If the demand remains the same, what is the price she gets? If the demand remains the same and she produces 2 billion pounds, what price does she get? Obvious answer. Just like the one that we just discovered, 150. How much would you get? Amanda knows.
Same.
So remember, if you get to 2 billion pounds, you're looking at that inelastic S2 over there. Okay? So if you have the right idea, it is 50 cents, right? Down here. And this is the difference between what a strawberry farmer would face versus what a corn producer is going to face. What can a corn producer do if the prices were lower? What will they do? They'll be like, yeah, let's just ship it off into some place. I'm going to pay some guy to store all my stuff. I'm going to wait until things improve. Because I can't do that. You overblow your target and the demand is the same. Congratulations. You can either throw away your stuff or you can accept a lower price and go home. Okay? Now you can make an argument that, hey, sure, the price is lower, but I'm also selling a lot more strawberries. So what about the total revenue that I can make? That's true. That'll be up to her to decide whether this 150 times 1 is better than 0.5 times 2. Incidentally, is that better? Can we do a quick multiplication? What is 0.5 times 2? It's actually just 1. Okay? What is 1.5 times 1? It's actually just 1.5, right? So 1.5 is bigger than 1. So there you go. So, point I'm trying to make is, you don't have a smooth supply curve that you see traditionally where storage is allowed, where suppliers can play games. They're like, nah, I don't like this price. I'm going to wait a bit, then they sell it. That kind of stuff is a no-go with perishables. Same situation with tomatoes. You can see the live prices fluctuate that you see in reality, which sort of makes these kind of curves possible. Okay? Suppliers' alternatives are extremely limited. Okay? So it's not just the fact that you have to sell all that extra, you have to do it in a very defined, well-defined window. Questions about this? Does that make sense? Are we going to be able to remember this about you have to have vertical fixed supply. Okay, you have a target amount of quantity in mind, and you're hoping that you'll be able to get a good price for it. But of course, you see the demand, and then if you place it correctly, so instead of she, just doing one, she could have made slightly less, maybe get even slightly higher price. But then does that mean that she would have made more money? Well, that's debatable. Questions about this? Questions from the audience, if Brooke is actually even listening. Let me just see. Live streaming. Wait, where'd it go? One person is watching. Am I the only person watching? Maybe she's not watching. Okay. Okay, the horizontal arm of the supply curve is the minimum price covering the cost, right here. I mean, you are going to have some sort of minimum price, right? I mean, you need to have whatever your machinery costs or something along those lines. All those fixed costs are covered here. The vertical arm represents the max amount available for the harvest. Again, Cosette does not have the choice of taking some of those strawberries and dumping them in storage. That's a no-go. Everything that you harvested has to go in the market. Position of supply curve may vary from season to season. So if Cosette miscalculates, then she just produces way more. And that's like that S2. If she calculates well, then she's at S1. Again, you have to remember that you may think that, oh wait, but why would she miscalculate? Like, shouldn't she always gun for S1? Yeah, but you don't know what the price is going to be by the time you actually harvest. You see what I'm saying? Price could just be slightly lower. The demand curve could have moved. A perishable crop producer must become a supplier at harvest. Sell it or smell it. I'm sure you have heard of this. More stupid emails. People are surviving. Okay, so here's a question for you. Consider the following scenario. Let's take 2 or 3 minutes, probably even more if you'd like. Consider the following scenario and tell me which scenario do you think the producer of this perishable commodity will actually prefer. So here's an example. Notice how in this example, the demand curve is actually downward sloping. See that? Now in this example, I'm telling you that the demand, you're getting some price, but the demand is perfectly elastic. Which scenario do you as a strawberry producer actually want to have? It's a very obvious answer if you had followed along with the purpose of these supply curves, just right now, just the way these things set up. Remember, you're still a strawberry producer, so you can see where the price is probably likely going to be, and you're like, cool, I'm going to make a certain amount of commitment. What commitment would you prefer, S1 or S2? Helen knows.
S2.
S2 is correct. And why is S2 the correct answer? You just get more money, right? See how the demand is like elastic, perfectly elastic? You should be producing as much as you can. Because the more amount you're going to sell, the more amount you're going to have here, the more people are going to buy. The price is just peak. I'm pretty sure if you look in the real world, the demand for strawberries is not that elastic. Okay, people are not crazy. I mean, people love strawberries, but they don't love it this much. Okay, so this is just a hypothetical example of demand being perfectly elastic. So the more supply you have, the better it is. Okay, of course, there's going to be considerations like other things that, oh, does this price justify you renting out more land to make your strawberries? Those are the considerations the farmer will have to decide. But just based on this, get S2. There's just more revenue. Price times that quantity, it's a bigger rectangle than this smaller rectangle. Okay, does that make sense? So these are the kind of questions I can ask you for a perishable commodity. Okay, from the homework or in the exam, definitely in the exam. Okay. Okay. Here is some variations, and this is, of course, an excellent example of sweet corn and grapefruit, depending on the harvest. Typically, you'll notice that around the harvest time, you're going to get just a decline and then eventual rise. And then we have like 2 different years, 2012, 2013, 14. Please remember, 2012 was a bit of a weird year because of the drought situation that was going on. Okay. Let's talk about non-perishable crops. On balance, the more easier thing to understand. Okay, we have a couple of nuances here, especially on the B side, the B chart. So please pay careful attention. But non-perishable crops are very similar to this outward sloping stuff we have been looking at. Okay. storage alternatives are open to supplier given positive slope to the supply curve, okay? Please do remember, and this is like really nothing to do with what we have on the slides here. You have to be careful with the way you interpret the word storage, okay? Just because you can store chicken in a freezer does not make it similar to corn. You see what I'm saying? A frozen chicken is completely different from fresh chicken. Storage alternatives open to suppliers give positive slope to the supply curve. Okay, so you see this horizontal portion. It's very similar to what we had in the perishable case. You're gonna have some sort of fixed cost to get your operation up and running. Okay, and then you can wait. Now let's see, there's like some sort of elastic demand right here. If you notice that, this is just a hypothetical example, if you notice the price was, let's say here, like where my red dot is, you'd be like, okay, cool, I am gonna wait. I'm gonna just wait until the price actually improves for me. But that's what allows you to get to this point, okay? Farmers have option of waiting, will sell more if price reaches P3. However, you can't wait forever as the new season begins, okay? Why can't we wait forever if the new season is beginning? Who can tell me what the intuition behind point 3 is? So suppose you're like, nah, I don't like any price. I'm just gonna wait and wait. And then now the new season has already begun. What's the problem with that? For, let's say, a crop like corn, which is non-perishable. Obvious answer. So remember that eventually the new season is coming, so there's an anticipation that even more product quantity is coming behind you. So at the time of harvest, typically prices are at their lowest. Okay, so if in the hopes of actually hoping that you're gonna get a better price, it may end up that your price never went up, it probably went down. Okay, that B thing that you see over there, that's essentially what's trying to explain that. Notice how the supply curve is mostly very inelastic. It has like a vertical bend to it, but about a certain point, it becomes a lot more inelastic. You see that kink there. Okay, it's upward sloping, but there's a kink, and that's what's sort of driving that change. Because just like strawberries, even non-perishable crops have a season. So if there's an anticipation for more crops coming, then you're going to see a more elastic shift. Okay, and at some point, you're going to see like this vertical nature where even for a non-perishable crop like corn, there's an anticipation that you're going to be able to eventually sell it. Okay. Kink indicates a combination of last year and this year's supply. If you look at corn, corn is a good example. Can somebody tell me around September, so we are in September, how much corn we have in the US right now? Is that a ballpark figure? So typically, every harvest cycle, you get about 13 to 14 billion bushels of corn. And around September, it's at its lowest, and it's around 1 billion or so. Okay, so there's an anticipation that in about 2 months' time or so, we're going to have a massive jump. Okay, so that's what sort of creates, instead of this smooth stuff, you're going to get some of that kink stuff. Okay. Questions? So basically with this, you are getting a much more normal scenario. Just remember, for a non-perishable crop, you're going to get a scenario where you don't like the price, just wait in storage. Don't wait forever though, because the new season might begin. Okay, so typically what will happen is, let's say farmers are getting an extremely shitty deal in like the end of November. So then they'll wait. They'll wait about 2 or 3 months, and by March, there's a very good chance things might actually improve. Okay. Okay, understanding the seasonal pattern. For once a year harvestable commodity like wheat, average price is lowest right around harvest and then slowly rises to cover the month by month storage costs. Okay, this effect can be seen in almost all grains. For example, the Kansas City #1 hard red winter wheat, for which I have a graph. But when I say all grains, I literally mean everything, like corn, soybean, you know. It is a very, very typical pattern. You don't even have to take my word for it. You can actually observe the price of corn from September 1, which is today, until the end of December. You will notice that right around the harvest time, when most of the farmers actually harvest, prices will be at its lowest for that specific season. Okay. Good to go. So here we have an example. This chart, you don't have to worry about it from a perspective of an exam, but I like it because, well, I'm a data guy, so it looks really cool. Notice how for each month, let's say this is January, I have prices from 2005 to 2014, so that's about 10 years, and the average in January for each of those years, so Jan 05, Jan 06, and then this was the mean, and then this was the variance, the distribution. Variance is just basically the idea of deviation from the mean, okay? So you notice that substantial deviation, and the deviation usually is the highest in Feb, but you'll also notice that for something like wheat, somewhere around here, July, August, so my advisor, Corey Walters, used to be my advisor back in Nebraska. He's a farmer based out of Montana. He typically heads home in the month of like August, July to go harvest his wheat. Okay, and you'll notice in an average, that's when the prices are lowest. Commodities, the vertical line represents a range that includes the average of monthly observations. Commodities more expensive to store have a more distinct pattern. Okay. Other seasonal patterns, you'll again notice tomatoes, strawberries, there's this sort of dramatic idea of once the harvest happens, right around here, you will consistently see price go up, okay? And then after Jan, they again start declining in anticipation for that year's harvest, okay? Same thing with tomatoes, okay? Carrots, which are much more semi-perishable, you see a much more consistent pattern. Wheat, which is of course storable, literally mirrors what we have here. You notice that this pattern is very similar to the pattern that we have here. Okay. So while variation is perishable, much more consistency is storable. Again, this right here directly mirrors the point I was trying to make here. Okay. You'll see like a dramatic difference depending on the type of amount of production you have. Okay, another example with corn, total supply, of course, is sum of beginning stocks plus production minus imports. It's just how it goes. And when I say minus imports, that's like American producers deciding, okay, I'm going to ship stuff to, I don't know, Europe or China or somewhere. So that's the supply that's left. So typically at the beginning, you have about 1 or 2 billion bushels. Okay, carrying on from the previous year. So I'll pause on that second point to draw your attention to that idea and that graph that we were looking at. If you keep on waiting, that's not good for you. You have to pick a point where you think that you'll get the highest possible price. I know that if you know some corn farmers these days, they're like, dude, I could have totally waited till May of this year and I would have gotten the best price. That is true, but that's usually true for just this year because, as I said, there's a disease going around in China, so that demand from China is extremely high. So that's confounding some of this stuff that we're talking about. But in a regular year, you may want to watch out, okay? And now you see some sort of return to normalcy because corn prices have been coming down substantially in preparation for the harvest coming in the next 2 months. Typical harvest, 12 to 14 billion. It slowly dwindles over the winter, spring and summer until we start again next harvest season. Okay? Flow commodities, much more sort of fluid. There's a much short-term scale for those. That's why they're called flow commodities. Pretty much marketed every week of the year. Therefore, prices are determined by weekly market conditions instead of once a year harvest crops like corn. So there's a big difference. Storage is possible, but expensive and impractical due to continuous production. An obvious example that you see is point 1 over there, which is for fresh milk. Okay? Fresh milk does not have storage beyond a short-term inventory. Cheese and dry milk, however, are stored long-term. How people end up drinking dry milk is literally beyond me, but hey, people have different tastes, and who am I to judge? Cheese, of course, is a whole different commodity entirely. Okay? Expectations regarding short-term price changes may influence producers' willingness to sell. Okay? So the last point over there was sort of not entirely, but sort of related to the milk drama that we saw during COVID. Because the price of milk sort of started declining when literally people weren't stocking milk in their shelves. Okay. Okay, price as a feedback signal to production, okay? Outlook information, so data and projections about market demand, supply, and prices provided by private agencies. So when we were using Cosette as the example for strawberries, as a strawberry producer, she has information that you see on point 1, okay? The amount of land, amount of production materials she wants to dedicate to get a certain amount of strawberries. She's just not going to jump into the whole thing blind. Most farmers don't. You ask Justin, he won't jump into stuff blind. There's always some sort of strategy going on for what to do for a specific year. Producers plan to increase production when anticipating profitable prices. So if you are a corn producer today in September 2021 in anticipation for planting in March 2022, you are probably looking to increase production. Acreage increase for 2022. Adjustments of amount supplied are limited by production lag times, okay? Sometimes, despite signal, no changes in prices are observed, and that is sort of like the bad case scenario where, well, it was looking like the price is going to go up, but then it didn't, okay? Well, that's why you have a lot of farmers who end up buying things like crop insurance, where they're like, oh, we're going to increase our production in a certain type of commodity, and the price never went up. So something bombed, so we're going to cover our losses using crop insurance. Okay. I know I should have sort of talked about this before I blew past this, but I really did want to point this out. When we were just talking about the perishable crop stuff, okay, you absolutely have to read this. Okay, so I have in detail we'll get to the Cobweb in just a second, but just the first page here, I have written stuff down about the stuff that I was just saying. Those are just literally my words. And please do read through this. Very important. Okay, back. Madeline, were you ready there? Okay. So this is a very important slide. Price expectations. Okay. There's two things that people have to think about. There's the price level and then the price duration. Typically, for any type of commodity, the level is the idea that if price is expected to increase, say for a year, relative to other crops, farmers will switch acreage to that crop, let's say, and think about, okay, I know, for instance, that corn is going to be good until the end of next year. And just IRL advice, if you know any corn farmers, please do tell them. It really does look like corn prices are going to stay high, at least above $5 a bushel until the end of next year. Then there's this thing that, okay, this is a short-term movement. I need to make hay while the sun is shining, and this is not a pun for all the hay producers in the audience. It's literally just, make hay while the sun shines. You actually increase your production, and you just collect as much as profit as you can, taking advantage of those high prices. Okay, but here's the kicker. Suppose you knew that the price of corn would forever be high. Now, I mean, that for me, I find it extremely hard to believe, but hey, I'm not a prophet. Suppose price of corn was going to increase forever. Well, then you go into this idea of duration. Then you start thinking of, okay, how do I change my infrastructure? Do I need to get more combines and stuff? Do I need to change my entire operation from corn, soybean to just soybean? Start thinking about how the soil is going to respond specifically for corn. Okay, so there's a long-term upward trend. Then broader investments will be made in that crop besides the one above. So, like the first case is you're anticipating a short-term increase, so you just want to do a hit job. Just okay, increase acreage, collect my profits, and return to normal going forward. Duration is when you make broader investments. Okay. Okay, so the Cobweb model is going to be today's last thing, super important. Please put a star next to this. And again, the reading material I just showed you, please go through that as well. I, again, also want to say, I go back here. Please read this too, the seasonality of prices. Okay, this is a extension article written, I believe, from Texas A&M, if I'm not mistaken. Whenever it opens. Anyway, it's about 2 or 3 pages. I can actually ask a question from here as well. So, especially in the homework and stuff. So just get a sense of like seasonality and its causes. So something that is seasonal versus something that's cyclical. So something that's seasonal, something we just talked about with corn in terms of when the production is happening, when the harvest is happening. Cyclical can be what we're seeing literally with corn prices these days, with months of high prices, possibly low months of low prices, and then high prices again. So there's a distinction there which you should read about. Okay. A theoretical description of how prices of a commodity could cycle even if its demand and supply curve was stable. Now, point here, one here is very important. The Cobweb model literally comes from that word. Who has seen spiders in their lives? People have seen spiders, right? Who has spiders in their home? Because unfortunately I do. No matter what I do, they somehow seem to return every year. Although rumors say that, not rumors, scientific evidence say that you should have some spiders in your home because they do a good job of cleaning up insects and stuff. If you have seen a spider's cobweb, that's really the idea here. And I'll show you how, from an economic perspective, that cobweb is indeed created. Okay? I would also like to point out, and you can write this down if you'd like, cobweb model is in fact a theoretical construct with some basis in empirical understanding. That means these patterns have been observed in real world data, but there are people out there, like literal experts, who actually disagree with this economic model. They say that this is better understood as a hypothetical model than an actual real world model. Okay? But it has a sound foundation, and I should be able to show you why. I mean, we have observed this happen in agriculture. Okay? The idea of the model is that it introduces a continual disequilibrium, a set of prices that keep changing over time, even though basic supply and demand schedules are stable. And you can see why in agriculture that is such a powerful concept, because, well, there's the same amount of farmers who are trying basically to make the same amount of corn, so about 12 to 14 billion bushels a year. And then there's the same amount of people who are trying to eat the same, whatever food that is. So theoretically, there should be that one price. I mean, why isn't the price of corn much more stable? Now, we know that there are foreign interruptions and stuff, but we run into what is known as the Cobweb model. And the way things are in September 2021, we are literally primed to experience a real world example of this, okay? Especially going into the new planting season in March. Okay, what is going on in this model? Okay, now the left side of it is the assumptions and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just walk you through this whole model. So please pay careful attention and do read the thing in the reading material I showed. Okay. So I hope people fully understand this, but if not, we're just going to walk through the exact model. Suppose for some year, okay, farmers experience, low, for some year, there's just low quantity produced, okay? Suppose we're here, right here at this point where the red dot is, okay? At this specific red dot, what is the quantity that is supplied in the market at this red dot? The quantity supplied in the market is, Amanda knows, at this red dot, the quantity supplied in the market. I think you know, right? This is Q1, right? This is right here. At this point, there's a supply, you have Q1 right here, okay? At this point, at this quantity, what is the price that the consumers are paying? This is the quantity, this is the price that the suppliers get. What is the price that the consumers pay? Remember, this is a lot less quantity. I mean, this is the equilibrium. The actual supply is right here at Q1. What is the price that the consumers pay? Michaela knows. So all you have to do is you just sort of trace this up. So there's this point, you trace this up to where the demand is, and this is where price of the consumers pay, that's P1. So because there's less supply, the price is a lot higher. Okay, you can actually imagine the price of corn right now. Kind of like that. So what the farmers are thinking, they're like, whoa. Consumers are paying P1. That's a really high price. I want to get in on it too. I mean, you should be a soybean producer thinking the same thing right now. So then they're like, okay, cool. I'm just going to go crazy, and I am, instead of trying to get to this point, which will be the natural equilibrium, the point of the X right here, they make so much that they blow way past it, right here to this point, from EB prime to EP, all the way here. Okay, So at that point, right here, which is the supply, the quantity in the market is Q2, but what is the price? What is the price that the consumers are willing to pay for quantity Q2? Remember, this is the demand curve. Anyone? There it is, McAllen knows. It's just 0.2 right here. So this is the demand, this is where the quantity is. P2 is the price that the suppliers will get now. So this is a self-fail. You made so much stuff that instead of the price settling at some equilibrium, you ended up going way past it. Now you dumped so much corn into the market, price heavily crashed. And in 2022, watch out for this. Okay. I have to make that point with an actual macro trends, and I'm going to do a 1-year trend. Okay. So notice how things were great in about May of this year. Now things have cooled again, still pretty high. It's 550 a bushel, really good numbers. Okay. But I anticipate you're going to have a bunch of people who are going to enter the market because they see this. They're like, whoa, this is excellent, okay? And then you're going to have a whole bunch of corn, and then we're going to go back down to like 350 or 4, inevitably. And that's essentially the idea of what we're trying to get at here, okay? So then the cycle doesn't quite end there. The reason why you have a box is because what happens at 2? Now you have a bunch of producers who made a whole bunch of corn. And they said that, oh no, I only made P2, which is such a low price. What are farmers going to do then? Anyone? Like they're getting low prices for that commodity corn. What are they going to do? So then, by waiting, they'll head to something else. They're like, oh, screw it. I ain't doing corn no more. I'm going to do hay or soybean or something. But they're going to divert their acreage away. And it's possible, just like what happened the first time around, they divert so much of it away that the price again shoots back up to 1. So we sort of circle around this box, never quite hitting that X spot. Or you can get what actually happens in the real world is some sort of a cobweb. Okay, you get to this point, instead of going all the way here, you stop here. Get to this point, and then you start making this cobweb pattern. So over a 5 to 6 year period, you settle on this point X. Okay? It just is a from here, you can start here, and that's not working. We're here. So instead of going all the way here, you can just start here. Don't do that. And then on we go until we are somehow managed to end up at this point here. It may not be immediately, but after a few seasons, we should see some sort of normalcy return. Okay? This specific chart can be easily explained using something like this. Okay? So notice how when there's too much corn, the price is low. Okay? When the price is low, farmers are like, all right, see ya, I'm out of here. I'm not making that crop, I'm gonna make something else. So then the output is low. Because the output is too low and the price is too high, and then on we go until we get to this point here where there's learning involved. Farmers are like, wait, we're going through the cycle back and forth. Output was low, price was high, but then the return output was moderate. And then because the output was moderate, the price was also moderate, which we would hope is somewhere close to an equilibrium. Okay, and then the pattern can continue, or it could get broken. It could get broken for a variety of reasons, like a disease going on in a different country, precisely what happened with corn this past year or so. Okay, so that's essentially the idea. Are there questions about the Cobweb model? And I know that we're going to do this one more time, which will just really drive home the point, but please read through that reading material. Okay, this idea of starting at a low price, farmers are like, well, look at this. I'm supplying less, but look at the price in the market, the consumers are paying. I want to get in on the action, so a whole bunch of them do, and then they go way past here, which leads to the price to be low, because they produce so much corn. Okay, and then they correct the season after. Instead of trying to get to this point, they overcorrect, and so sort of we hover around the square. That's what creates that cobweb pattern. Eventually, it's likely that we get to that point X, which is what is shown here. Okay, so 10 periods would, at least in corn terms, would be 10 seasons or 10 years. So from, let's say, 2010 to 2020. Questions, comments? All right, so here we have an example. Oh, I gotta rewrite stuff. Inventory of cattle and calves by cycles in the US. Okay. Pricing, farm to retail price spread, something that we have talked about. The difference between the prices that farmers receive and those that consumers pay is called the price spread. Okay. Compiled and published for numerous farm commodities, and the price spread is easier to calculate for products with less processing, such as eggs. Okay. Harder to do for something like steak. Lots of steps involved, eggs a lot less. Farmers get a higher share of products which require less processing. Something that we discussed in the previous lecture, in the intro one, where we were talking about down the road, farmers may have a mechanism to market their produce or products directly to the consumers, minimizing the middlemen, which might again allow them to get a better price spread. Okay, and that is what I have for today. Please review the material, okay? And we will have a homework pretty soon. So no class on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. So I will see you guys on Wednesday. By the way, if you want, you can come over to my office and try and pick a shirt for it's an agribusiness shirt. It's kind of nice. And please reply to Shelby with a time that works for you. Who has a class before this class? I know I already talked to Amanda. Does anybody have a class? Yeah. If you, what was that? Oh, you do, right? But like you're still free from like 12:15 to 1-ish, right? I know that's lunch and that's super annoying, but if you could just get your food here and then eat it here while we have the meeting, it would be great. Because as I was just saying, farm science review is coming up, some county fairs are coming up, and stuff that people might be interested in. Really useful stuff, and we just want to have some plans for that, and possibly things like farm trip and stuff like that. So, yeah, respond to Shelby's email. Just tell her a time that works for you. And I know that we are here mostly on Mondays and Wednesdays, so perhaps like next Wednesday, for instance. Okay, thank you. And we can go to my office if you'd like to collect the shirts. Okay, streaming, end stream, and